And if you can't kiss her, you can't stand her anymore.
So wrote Vittorio Benussi, the restless experimental psychologist and pioneering researcher of perception and emotions. Benussi led the experiments leading to invention of the lie detector and was also an early investigator of a hypnotic state that he called basic sleep. The fascinating papers corresponding to his work are held at the Aspi Center, Historical Archives of Italian Psychology at the University of Milano Bicocca. They reflect the tormented personality of a scholar torn between an at times obsessive passion for his work and deep psychic suffering.
I have loved with every conceivable refinement. I don't see where to look for something new. It's always about the same game. Only work is an exception. Only in it is there development.
Between lines of tiny, neat handwriting, which are often interspersed with drawings, emerge Benussi's innermost thoughts, urgently fixed on the page in Italian or German.
Remember how ugly and humiliating her reluctances are. Remember how these moods take away your strength and drive you toward poison. Remember all this ugliness. How come I suddenly felt good during the lecture? As if I realized for the first time my passion for you. The class has gone wrong. I can't be present. I feel excluded, disheartened, and threatened by unclear forebodings. I feel myself called. They are almost mild forms of dizziness, saying, "Come, go and rest, finish, stand there in peace, and you won't know any more."
Emotion is a common thread running throughout Benussi's entire archive. Emotion as an object of experimental study, but also passions, love, and especially grief as states of profound disturbance. A brilliant experimenter trained in laboratory psychology in Graz, Benussi studied the inner states that accompany lying and sincerity, becoming the forerunner of the so-called lie detector. Beginning in 1914, he worked to determine the physiological symptoms triggered by our awareness of lying or telling the truth while giving testimony. His experiments focused mainly on the breath, which is particularly sensitive to variations in emotional states, and attempted to identify involuntary expressions that could betray and nail the observed subject.
It is a question of establishing whether between sincerity and fiction on the one hand, rhythm and respiratory form on the other, there is such a definite and constant relationship that it can be used as a sure symptom, and therefore as a diagnosis, for that succession of states of mind, which constitute or accompany a true or false testimony.
In the early post-war period, Benussi continued his research at the University of Padua, where he used hypnosis unconventionally as an instrument of psychological investigation to break down and study the phenomena of psychic life. Is it possible, Benussi wondered, to create pure emotion in the laboratory, unaccompanied by thoughts or images? His answer was yes, that emotions can arise and exist independent of intellectual functions. He therefore coined the concept of functional emotional autonomy. Subjecting his students to experiments, he discovered that in a particular state of hypnosis, which he called basic sleep, intellectual life was annulled. Pure emotions could then be grafted onto that state. His favorite experimental subject was Margherita Signorelli, a student of philosophy. Benussi induced basic sleep in her using the suggestive formula.
You sleep peacefully, without thoughts, without images, and without any tendency to thoughts or images. You sleep peacefully and feel good.
He would then suggest the emotion she should feel, for example.
Now, in this nothingness, a state of deep hope develops.
Margherita Signorelli, upon awakening, recounted her experience.
With the word hope, I felt an impression of joy, and then hope developed quickly and easily. It was an internal smiling towards some external thing that had to come closer to me, and at the same time acquiescence, like a nodding of the head, and also a leaning toward an external something that was nothing material, and yet made me feel that it had to come closer to me from the front and from above.
But negative emotions were also evoked.
The feeling of discontent developed quite quickly and immediately pretty clear and strong. Then it increased, but not much. It was like a sense of wanting to push away something in me, a shaking of the head, like when you shake your head, not to deny something, but to send away what you don't like. Jointly, there was a very slight sense of disgust, of repugnance.
Benussi verified the existence of these induced emotions by analyzing the subject's respiration, in accordance with research he had already conducted in Graz on lying and truth-telling. But Benussi's lively and original scientific activity was not enough to soothe the deep psychic suffering that had accompanied him since his youth.
Tonight, it must have been at the crack of dawn, I dreamed that I had swallowed as a test a grain of my cyanide. I felt a flush tighten in my chest, then extinguished my consciousness, and I thought, yes, it's good. This is good. And I woke up, relaxed. I began to feel better, to assume that the terrible crisis of these days was fading. Who knows? Maybe the crisis was resolved in that kind of suicide rehearsal, done in a dream.
At only 49 years old, on November 24, 1927, Benussi committed suicide, in the same manner described in his dream 8 years earlier. His dead body was found by his students. Many decades later, Cesare Musatti recounted the event.
We found Benussi dead in his armchair in the institute with a cup of tea smelling of cyanide in front of him. To protect our teacher from gossip, we did not reveal this detail, and the doctor, the father of one of our colleagues, issued a death certificate for cardiac paralysis. I never knew whether the doctor understood how things had gone, since we, committing a crime I do not regret, had made all traces of the deadly tea disappear, and also a note in which Benussi asked to warn his brother.